So normally we start off our podcast by asking the interviewee where they're dialing in from, but today we are actually in the same room in Seattle, Washington. I actually had the pleasure of interning with Austin's team this summer, so this episode is especially dear to me. So Austin, have you always been interested in space?
Everybody's interested in space as a kid. Not everybody, but I don't know that I had any particular extra fascination with space as a young child beyond what other kids would have. Maybe I just never grew out of it. And maybe I'm just very fortunate to get to work in the space industry.
So what made you then maybe stick with it, whereas other people might have gone in a different direction?
How do I end up working in the space industry? Well, I would not have said as a high school student that I wanted to work in the space industry. I didn't even really know it was an industry. I know you have a job doing things like what I do today. I just kind of lived my life and I wanted to play a lot of basketball and I happened to be good at math. And on a whim, as a senior in high school, I took an astronomy class at the University of Iowa. I grew up in Iowa City. And it was awesome. I was just fascinated learning about our solar system and the planets and the moons and some of the mathematics behind it that could inform you about how our universe operates. And that kicked me off into going and majoring in physics. And that eventually became aerospace engineering for graduate school. And along the way, I realized, well, if what I love is the discovery of what's out there in the universe and pushing forward what humans are capable of trying to do out there in the universe, then engineering and aerospace engineering in the space industry is a great way to do it. So we've ended up here.
Nice. So how did you find your co-founder, Trevor, and what pushed you to start a company?
So as I left graduate school, I did a master's degree at Purdue. And then I applied to 100 different jobs. And I got 2 job offers. One was in the finance industry. And they asked me one question about grad school, which is, why did you waste your time going to grad school? And one was some job with Lockheed Martin in Alabama that I don't even remember applying to. I think they just kind of scooped up a bunch of leftover graduate students. And I said, okay, well, I really want to work in the space industry. So I'm going down to Alabama and we'll give it a shot. And I spent a couple years working at Lockheed doing flight test analysis for ballistic missile defense. And actually really enjoyed my experience there. But I didn't quite fully work in the space industry in the way that I wanted to. And so after a couple years, I got an opportunity to go to Blue Origin. So it was out here in the Seattle area. It was Jeff Bezos's rocket and now space exploration company. And so I joined Blue Origin in January 2016. And it was incredible to walk in. 3 weeks in, we were launching and landing a rocket, and we did it again a month and a half later. I'm pulling down all the data, and I'm waking up at 1:30 in the morning to go to work to help prepare for the test. And it was an amazing experience. And I ended up working at Blue Origin for about 4 years, and it was halfway through my time there that Trevor, my now co-founder at Starfish, finished up his PhD out of Colorado and came and joined the same team that I was on at Blue Origin. And I was his blue guide on day one. So I was the person that came down and said, hey, welcome to here's where your desk is going to be. Here's where we're going to get lunch. Let me tell you about what's going on. And so we kind of bonded from that and then worked together on a lot of the problems that we tried to solve at Blue Origin, which for us at least ended up being a tremendous foundation to go and start a company together. So that answers a little bit of how I met Trevor. And then I think the second part of this question is, how do we go from, okay, hey, we have fun working together to we're off and starting a company? So I am not one of the people that always wanted to start a company. I did my undergrad at Stanford right as the iPhone was being invented, was becoming popular. And everybody I knew seemed to be starting their new iPhone app business over the summer. And I just rolled my eyes. I said, no way, you want to make pictures that just automatically delete after 7 seconds? How could that ever be a business? What are you guys talking about? And that worked out well for those guys, but it never tempted me. And it wasn't until much later working at Blue Origin, I went to a couple of conferences in the space industry, and I saw that people who were starting business in the space industry, I saw that for the first time, they weren't just independently wealthy people who were doing it, who were building the company with their own money, like a Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Richard Branson. I saw that there were folks that were kind of just regular old people starting space companies and potentially able to have large impacts on the space industry. And that was extraordinary to me, the idea that you could start a company and you had a huge lever arm to go change the course of how humans go out into the stars. And I just thought that was incredibly powerful. And then as I reflected on it, I knew who the right person was to go talk to, because Trevor is one of those people who always wanted to start his own company. He was, the elementary school kid that at his swim meet would go around selling trinkets when he wasn't racing because he was going to be a businessman someday. And the pairing was pretty natural between us. And we said, okay, well, let's think about it. Let's think if we want to do this. And we're engineers. And so we ran a really diligent process over 6 months and thought through, well, what are the ideas going to be? And we thought a lot about, okay, well, what are we signing up for? Like, what are we committing to each other? What are we agreeing upon? What are our goals? Are they well aligned? And I think that's hugely important in the process. You can be close friends with somebody, you can love working with them, but if you don't want the same thing for the company, then you're going to butt heads and it's going to be challenging rather than additive along the way. But for us, we were really well aligned in what we wanted from it. And at the end of the day, the decision came down to, okay, well, are we going to go quit our jobs at a real company that pays us real money and go to the library and say this thing's a company and we have jobs there that don't pay us any money, and give it a shot? And I remember I remember talking through with my dad, and for references that may fit into the story, at the time that we were making this decision, I was roughly 30 years old, my dad was roughly 60 years old. And I was talking through, and you're always kind of nervous when you're talking to family members, even that you're close with, and you're going, well, I don't know how they're going to react if I float this kind of crazy decision by them. Like, hey, Dad, remember how I went through all this school and you paid for it, and then I had a job, and now I'm thinking about just maybe quitting the job and making no money instead. And you're not sure how they're going to react to it. And my dad sort of processed. He said, well, he says, I think there's 2 times in life you can do this. He says, you can either do it at your age, before you have kids, before you have big responsibilities, things that you don't really want to take risk with. He says, or you can do it at my age, when your kids can pay for themselves and take care of themselves. You don't have to worry about it anymore. He goes, I'm too tired at my age. You got to do it at your age. And I reflected a lot on that. And it came out that, boy, this is kind of a no loss chance for us to try to start a company here. That if we do it and we succeed, we have an incredible lever on to go impact how humans go out in the universe. And if we don't, we learn a whole bunch, we meet a bunch of interesting people. We had fun working on it for a year. So here we are.
So with you and Trevor, what actually came first? Finding each other as co-founders, or did one of you already have the idea for Starfish?
I would say finding each other as co-founders came first. Now, to some degree, it came together all at once, well, all sort of jointly over a period of time that we talked through, boy, if we want to do this, what ideas would we pursue? Like, we were probably more locked in on being co-founders early on than we were on any particular idea, although the idea that we are executing on happens to be the first one that we really talked about.
How did you narrow it down to this idea? Or you just threw out ideas and saw what stuck? Or how did you get here?
We have somewhere an old list of like 30 different ideas, because we said, I know we've got this idea we're pretty interested in, but we better start broadly. We better think critically about this. And we talked through a variety of ideas on what do we think is feasible from a technology standpoint, what do we think that there's a market for, what do we think that the 2 of us are well suited for. I don't know that it was the cleanest process. I think that to some degree, the particular idea is maybe a little bit overrated in founding a company. I think if you have the people that you want to work with and the right appetite for you want to learn a lot and be passionate about something and have a little bit of risk from your working life, and you have a space that you're excited to work in, then I think the particular idea can fall out of it at the end of the day from a series of customer conversations and product experimentations. Everybody sort of pivots and adjusts, and it's never exactly your initial idea that you're going after in the first place. And so we put a good amount of effort in the idea early on. I don't know that you necessarily need to. I think the idea is something that you're always figuring out along the way as you're building business.
That sounds logical in a company that has maybe an ability to fail a little faster and try things faster than a space company. How do you think about that in the context of something as technical as space? And maybe just generally, for I believe a lot of our audience is unfamiliar with the space sector. What does it take to actually build a space company?
Yeah, well, a challenge that is inherent in the space companies is that there is high capital. Well, depending on what you're developing, but we're developing a satellite to do things on orbit. And if you're developing a satellite that takes a lot of capital, and maybe even more than the capital, it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time to coordinate a variety of suppliers. It takes a lot of time to procure the right launch slots and get the right licenses. And customers are used to a multi-year sales cycle, really. And that does in some ways seem to be at conflict with the idea of, well, iterate and fail fast, that has been a core to success at many startups. Something that we focus on here at Starfish is trying to test ideas early on however we can. So when we're writing flight software, we run it against really complicated physics simulations. It's not perfect. It's not like testing it on orbit, but you're still testing and failing and iterating a lot. You can do the same thing with hardware when you're developing and testing your hardware. You can do the same thing with customers. As you go out and you approach a customer and you say, hey, what do you think about this? And you get their thoughts. And if they say, oh, that's kind of interesting, then you can say, well, hey, would you be willing to sign something? Would you be willing to share some information with us? There are little tests that you're doing to evaluate, is this really a useful product for them? Is this really going to be a good business? Now, the ultimate test of are they buying your product and giving you the money you want for the product that you have developed takes a longer time, a lot of times, to get to in space and deep tech in general than if you're building a B2B SaaS business. But you can still, in many ways, use that same test and fail and iterate philosophy.
How did you get or convince potential customers and even your first new hires that your idea could even work?
One of the hardest challenges in trying to do what we're trying to do is that you need buy-in from a lot of people along the way. You need buy-in from people who work at Starfish. You need buy-in from your customers. You need buy-in from funding sources. You need buy-in from suppliers. And you kind of have to get a little bit of ground with one and then use that to help you get a little bit of ground with the other all along the way. And so some of our early employees would have seen, okay, I can see some of the analysis that Austin and Trevor have done, and there's a pathway to something interesting here. And in fact, all of the early people who joined us were people that Trevor and I knew previously. They can see a little bit of, oh, look, you got a little bit of investor funding, or you got some early government R&D contract. There's a little customer buy-in. There's money that people can actually get. I am curious to turn this question around a little bit. You're an MBA student at Wharton. You have a lot of opportunities over the summer to go to a lot of different places. Why did you think that some 40-person company in the Seattle area that hasn't even put a satellite on orbit yet was the right company to go spend a summer with?
Wow, Austin. I can honestly say that no one's ever tried to flip roles on me before while recording a podcast. So, why did I choose Starfish? Well, honestly, I first applied because as a first year, you're throwing your resume in all sorts of directions. And I really wanted to see what a deep tech startup was like. And so that was the first thing that drew me to Starfish. But what really made me choose Starfish over the summer was I loved the culture that I got a sense of. I mean, what other interview process would give you the chance to give a 15-minute presentation on abstract art and still get the position? And I got the sense that you cared, like, even what an intern would think and an intern's opinions. And I thought that I could actually help you guys do something over the summer. And so I was really excited by that. And of course, as a intern, you don't really need to make a bet on whether or not you think the company's going to succeed. But now, after these 2 months at Starfish, I really believe in the company and will keep in touch, whether you like it or not. So, speaking of culture, one of the things I love about Starfish is the commitment to live and work with joy, which I've definitely seen this summer and really enjoyed. How have you actively thought about building and continuing such a culture?
So I'll say the commitment to live and work with joy here at Starfish isn't, in my mind, I don't think of that as Starfish Space's culture. I think of that as our objective. That when Trevor and I set out to start Starfish, there were two objectives that we had. One, we wanted to provide new capabilities for the space industry and for humanity as we go out into the universe around us. And the second was to provide a place where people can work and live their lives outside of it with joy. And those are the goals of Starfish Space. Starfish Space doesn't exist to make money. Starfish Space makes money to fulfill those two goals. That is a choice that we made in starting the company. And we were fortunate to get some advice early on to really write out, what do you want from this company, both yourselves personally and for the company to accomplish? So to some degree, I guess that's not necessarily the culture here. Now, that doesn't mean that we always do a good job of trying to achieve that goal. And you have to try to construct the company and maybe build a culture to help you achieve both of those two objectives that we have for Starfish. And then culture broadly at a company, I think, can be a tricky topic. I heard somebody say early on that culture is not what you say, it's what you do. And it can be easy to talk about culture and talk about the type of culture that you have. But I think what's more key is how you actually operate and what comes to be in fruition. Early on, a lot of it was just discussions from Trevor and I and early employees at Starfish. And we talked about how do we want to construct things to accomplish the two objectives that we've set out. And I think that to some degree, you almost just adopt little things that were in the personalities of people early on here at Starfish. And as you get larger, it takes a little bit more conscious effort at times to set up processes that replicate at a larger scale the things that we did when it was 5 of us. And to try to share the stories and share the terminology and share the philosophies that early on we just talked about every Monday. It was like half of every Monday. Let's just talk about Starfish. What are we thinking about? And we don't have that as a company anymore. That would be really inefficient as a company to do anymore. But you have to, I think, find other ways and forums, whether that's through all hands, whether that's through, we have Starfish DNA now, which is kind of like an Amazon leadership principles type thing. All of that you can be careful with. It can sound a little like over the top. It can sound a little preachy, a little fake along the way. So it's a dangerous balance to strike. But I hope that it's almost more, it just comes through in the habits that we build up for each other, whether that is, hey, we strike these meetings and we have these meetings focused around these topics to really help us accomplish and execute the goals that we've set out, to trying to encourage each other to take time off because you're passionate about what you're doing and you just automatically dive in and you end up going, oh crap, I haven't gone on a vacation in a little while and I kind of need one. But I think that those end up being a lot of the habits that we build. And then as you scale, you try to go from the habits to processes. We try to go. I don't know if it's successful. We're only 40 people right now.
I think it's been pretty successful. But the company did counter one pretty significant challenge this summer. I'm not going to go into too much detail. You can check out Starfish's social media as well if you want to get the true deets. But the issue came out of something that was completely out of our control and puts our mission, the mission that we launched in, I think, June, called OtterPup, at ongoing risk. What was your immediate reaction?
Yeah, so the background for folks, Otter Pup is a smaller version of the Otter, which is the full satellite that we're building, is the product that Starfish Space is creating. And the Otter Pup is a technology demonstration satellite. So we're not providing a service that a customer pays us for, but allows us to prove out all of the key technologies that enable the fully grown Otter, that enables us to provide services for our customers. And that core technology demonstration that we want to do is we want to go take our little satellite and dock with another satellite in space. And if we do it, it would be the first ever commercial satellite docking in low Earth orbit, be the first ever satellite docking with electric propulsion. And we'd have just docked two objects in space for less than $10 million, when every time that's been done in history up until this point, it's $200 million plus. So right at kind of our core thesis of, well, we think we can do this affordably for the first time, and it unlocks a tremendous amount of opportunity for us as a business and for us as an industry. All of that was what's running through my mind as we go to launch the satellite. And that was 20 months of really dedicated effort from the Starfish Space team. And that's what a lot of my focus of my life has been on for that time period leading up to that mission. And everybody has a bunch invested in it. And there was successful launch off of SpaceX. Everybody's exciting. We had cake, we had champagne, we all watched on TV. And that evening, we started to find out that we had gone up sitting on top of another satellite connected with them as our ride in space. And they separated from the rocket just fine. And then they had an issue that caused them to fire a thruster on board the satellite. And over a 20-minute period, they expended all of their propellant, spinning up our satellite. And it's supposed to spin, 1 to 2 degrees per second. Our Otter Pup got left spinning 330 degrees per second on orbit, which is just wild, 150 times more than what the satellite is supposed to experience. And it was chaos in the aftermath because you don't know what's going on and you have to make split decisions. And I had just been driving home. I got home. I saw my wife. I just opened the door, said, I have to go back into work. I'll see you tomorrow. And closed the door and drove back into the office. And all along the way on the drive, I'm just calling random people. What do you know? What's going on? Here at the office, there were a few of us that were just on the phone with everybody we could find, and then we get back together and go, what information have we learned? And you're doing this because you have to make some split-second decisions on the satellite. What's the path forward going to be? How do you keep it alive? How does the mission evolve? And then you realize, well, there's a lot ahead of us here. There's a lot to try to recover the mission. There's a lot to see if you can get anything out of the satellite once you've recovered it. There's a lot to think about. How do you share this information appropriately with the team here at Starfish? How do you share the information with your partners? How do you share the information to the public? And those were all problems that are almost immediately on your mind because you're sitting there and you're spinning like wild and your mission's at risk and it might all fall apart at any instant. We still have not fully recovered this Otter Pup satellite. It's still spinning. We're still not sure if we're going to get anything out of this mission. In some ways, that's disheartening to encounter. You put so much work into it, and it's not going the way that you wanted. And in some ways, it's disheartening for the business. We were fortunate that it's not, oh my gosh, our business is going to fail because of this. But it's definitely not a good thing for the business. It's definitely a setback for the business. But there was also a weird voice inside of me that was kind of excited about, hey, we got our backs up against the wall. We got a really hard problem. I don't know how we're going to figure it out. We had a lot of things go well for us for 2 years at Starfish Space. It's not how it started off. It wasn't when Trevor and I started, we just failed over and over and over again. And we haven't been in a situation like this one where, oh gosh, this is low odds. I don't know how this is going to go. And when you have those problems, sometimes it's fun to have the challenge of the problem. And if you can make any progress with those problems, what an epic story that you get to tell, that you get to share, that you get to celebrate and experience. And so the launch and the anomaly occurred on Monday. Tuesday, Wednesday, sorting through what's going on, communicating with folks, making plans. You were part of some of these meetings, Emma. And I realized, like Friday, I'm like super engaged. And I'm in a weird way, kind of excited. And I'm kind of having fun. And that was not the feeling that I expected to be feeling at all. But in some ways, it was awesome. And maybe it comes back to where I think that the value of starting a company comes not from, oh, look, your business can be successful and it's really positive if you're successful. I think that being a founder can be an incredibly fulfilling thing, even if your business totally fails, because it can be incredibly engaging and you're really passionate about this dream that you really think is a dream worth pursuing. And you learn a whole bunch and you work with incredible people. And to me, that moment of, okay, well, we're going to give this a shot and we're going to try to keep the Auto Cup alive and see if we can get anything from it, really typified that, really was a prime example of, boy, you can get a whole lot from being a founder and you can be a really positive experience, even if things aren't necessarily going well for the business. Now, we have a lot of other things that are going well for business, and maybe that helps me feel positive right now. But I was surprised that that was the emotion that came out of it as things started going bad for it that long.
I'm surprised to hear this all as well. Throughout the entire time, I don't think I've seen someone so calm, cool, and collected while everything was kind of going crazy or falling apart at the seams. But for those listening, at least as of time of recording, Otterpup is still alive and slowly, hopefully, detumbling.
It's still alive. We're still in contact with it. By the time everybody's listening to this, that might not be true. Not. It's right on the hairy edge always.
Yeah, continue to listen for potential updates at the ends, but hopefully there'll be a positive one. So anything else you learned as a founder, any lessons learned for the future from this challenging situation?
I think one thing that really stood out to me in the process was how supportive the team at Starfish Space was. And that's a team that's pretty broadly defined. We had everybody here in person at Starfish. The immediate reaction was, what can I do to help? Hey, how can I help with this? And the investors that Starfish Base have all were texting me like, hey, how can I help? What can I do to help out? And our suppliers were doing the same thing. People reaching out to the woodwork. Some of our competitors reached out to us that say, hey, we're thinking of you. We know how hard this is. Let us know if there's any way we can help. Which I think is one of the amazing things about the space industry, that we're all in this to do cool things in space. And at the end of the day, if it's somebody else doing the things that Starfish Space wanted to do, I'm going to be excited that somebody's doing the things that we wanted to do. But to have that reaction from everybody that interacts with Starfish Space was really a pretty incredible experience. And you go, boy, do I feel fortunate to get to interact and to get to work with all of these folks. What are other things that I learned from the process? I mean, I think one thing that was a personal learning was just learning how to communicate and share with folks as things are unfolding. We tried to strike a balance where we shared information, leaning on the side of sharing more information, both internally at Starfish, with partners, and with the public. But we wanted to do so in a way that meant that people weren't being swung side to side with emotions as every little piece of news were coming in. And so internally with Starfish, that looked like updates. Usually after we'd had a few hours to process something, we would send out a big email and say, hey, here's what's going on, here's the status. Or at the end of the day, here's what's going on, here's the status. We tried to really emphasize the things that we know and not speculate too much on the things that we didn't know internal to the company. And then both publicly and with partners, we shared, we didn't realize was generally much more than folks share. And a lot of folks reached out to us and said, hey, we really appreciate your transparency, which that was totally purposeful on our part, but would now be purposeful going forwards, because by sharing that information, it went from folks, if we didn't share information, I think people would be sitting there speculating, oh, why haven't we heard from Starfish Space? Wonder if they messed up that satellite. And by sharing information, with people going like, oh man, I'm really rooting for my friends at Starfish. I'm really excited for everything that I hope it all goes well for them, and I want to help if I can. And maybe we're just incredibly fortunate to get to interact with lots of great people in that standpoint. But that was definitely a learning for me going forward, that by sharing how things were actually going and they're not going very well, we have a lot of people who are supporting us in their journey in ways that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, I've heard you mention a few times this summer the community of other founders and various supporters that you've been able to rely on throughout the process. How did you go about building this community of especially other founders that you could go to with questions?
I think having a network of founders, especially in your industry, is an incredibly important thing for a founder, because I think that there are unique sets of questions that you can kind of only address with each other. As much as you come to lean upon advisors and investors and even people that are on your team, there are some sort of founder unique problems and challenges. And having somebody else who's sharing in some of those challenges is a really good way to talk through things. Now, separately for your business, I think there's also a value of, if you go back and forth with a founder on something, there are times where two people on two teams can put incredible effort into proposals and try to find ways to jointly do something together, and it hits roadblocks. And if two founders know each other, you call each other up and say, look, let's make it happen, wipe the roadblocks out of the way. And that can sometimes be an efficient way of getting business done. But I think that beyond that, sometimes just the network of leaning on each other is an incredibly valuable thing. For us, it emerged through, to some degree, a bunch of accelerators that we went through. And in the process, whether it's Creative Destruction Labs was an amazing one, Boost VC, our initial investors, ran an accelerator. Hyperspace Challenge was one that the US Air Force ran that we were part of. All were fantastic. And then to some degree, it's just taking advantage of all the little connections. Somebody will say, hey, I know this founder. Would you like to talk to them? I always say yes. I always want to talk to other founders now. And that's an incredibly helpful thing, incredibly valuable thing on a lot of fronts. And something I would encourage folks as they are starting companies. A lot of founders who are ahead of you will be more helpful than you think they might be. And you'll wonder, why the heck are they being helpful? This doesn't make sense. But I think a lot of times the reason that they're being helpful is because they still think of themselves. I still think of me and Trevor as two folks in the public library trying to build a company here. And I think about all the people who were ahead of us and tried to help us along the way. And so anytime anybody who's just founding a space company reaches out, man, I want to talk to them and I want to share with them these crazy things that I've learned that I don't know if they'll ever apply in any other forum.
I love that. Just a community of people excited about space. Warms your heart a little bit. I know you're an engineer, but do you have any advice for MBAs or other business professionals interested in the space sector, but worried that it takes too much technical knowledge?
So the space sector is definitely one that is heavy on engineering, but it's one that also has lots of roles for lots of different folks. Here at Starfish Space, 70% of the people that we have at Starfish are engineers. And that means that 30% of the people we have are not engineers. I think we have relatively more engineers than probably most companies in the space industry. And so there's a lot of ways that a lot of different folks can be helpful, whether that is supporting business development, whether that's supporting operations like you did this summer, Emma, whether that's supporting products or the projects as you're working on them. A lot of ways that folks can bring different capabilities that they have to the table. Now, I think that no matter what, you have to be technical. But I have a friend who comes from a non-engineering background and entered into the space industry, and she's extraordinary and she kicks butt. And she uses the term technical a little different than engineering. She says, hey, I have to be technical. I have to go and understand how this ground station comes together for my satellite to talk to. I don't have to understand what type of electrical connectors are we using in the ground station to be able to pass that data back and forth. That's not the type of technical that I am. But just because it's not engineering doesn't mean that it's not technical. And at Starfish, you have to be very technical. I mean, Nami, you were really technical working on some of the financial models this summer. our business development team, I think of it as very technical, the process that we run to build up our customer pipeline and to engage with customers. And so I think that there can still be incredible value there. And I think as you do that, we're fortunate at Starfish Space at a small scale that there becomes a lot of respect and support between the various teams, both those that are more focused on engineering and those that are less focused on engineering. And people tend to lean on each other where they go, hey, I'm good at this part, but I'm not good at this part. How can you help me with it?
Love that. So for all you MBAs out there, just listen and know that there is an opportunity for you in the space world, should you try and look for it. 2 final short answer questions. First of all, what is a wild bet you have on the future of the space industry?
Well, I think all things comes with odds. Maybe this is what you get for talking with a physics major. I think that it's easy to get really, really optimistic and excited about the space industry and say, look how much launch costs have been coming down. Look how much capability people have been able to pack in the small satellites. Look at kind of the funding and the excitement and the energy that's gone on in the space industry. Imagine what the future could hold, and it's so wonderful. At the same time, I heard some people who helped operate the Apollo missions tell stories about sitting in mission control as the last Apollo mission was coming back from the moon. And what were they talking about? And I think it's Apollo 17 is transitioning back, and there's a couple days of kind of just the journey back from the moon to Earth. And it's, you got a monitor, but you don't have a lot you're actively doing. And they were sitting in mission control talking about going to Mars. And they're like, man, look at how much we've done. It's been 70 years to go from the first flight of the Wright brothers airplane to having humans going to the moon like every 6 months. And they said, I just can't wait to go to Mars. I wonder if it's going to be in the 80s or the 90s. Obviously, it hasn't happened yet. And in fact, we haven't been back to the moon. And so you can get really excited about all the potential, but that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. And you have to be careful about, especially as a founder, and sometimes you're optimistic as a founder, I think you have to be careful about getting too optimistic and too overly excited. So all of these are bets. Anything that I'm really excited about, I think that there's some chance that this could happen. And sometimes if you're forming a business, maybe you want to go after, listen, there's only a 10% chance that it happens. But if it happens, our business is going to be incredibly successful. One thing that I think is really interesting is on-orbit manufacturing. And there are a few companies that are going after this in different ways. Made in Space is a company that was kind of an original pioneer. Varda is a company now that's got a significant capital backing and put their first satellite up on the same rocket that we put our first satellite up on. I think that there will come a day where there's something that is just made better in space. And in fact, that already exists. They call them Z-band fibers. They are better fiber optic fibers. They kind of have misuses right now, so it's not a huge market. But someday, I don't know if it's going to be a pharmaceutical. I don't know if it'll be like a single crystal room temperature superconductor. Something I think is going to be made in space because it's just made better in a space environment. And that is going to drive incredible effort and capability to go out. And I think that as part of that, Starfish Space will be there to go like, hey, how are you going to build things in space? You're going to build that facility by having a bunch of different pieces that get pushed and assembled together with robotics. And I like what we're developing right now here at Starfish Space. And I think that'll be an opportunity for us. And I think that'll be really exciting. I don't know that it's going to happen, but I think there's potential that it happens, and that's really exciting. I'm bad at these short questions. I'm just giving you one.
Yeah, that was a long answer question. So, final one, maybe a short, maybe not, but
Yeah.
I'm sure all our listeners have been wondering where the name Starfish came from. Is it actually your favorite animal, or is it just a random choice?
We have a list of names just like we had a list of company ideas. We have a list of like 20 names that Starfish Space could have had somewhere. And like with a lot of them, Starfish Space was the original idea that we just came back to. So maybe we just have a cognitive bias that we come up with an idea and then we explain to ourselves why it's the best idea. Why is Starfish Space exciting? Like, why did we pick that name though? One of the things that I think is really interesting is that somebody hundreds or thousands of years ago looked at this little critter in the ocean and said, I think that looks just like those big burning balls of gas that I see up in the sky. And I think that's representative of fascination that we have with life around us here on Earth. And maybe this comes back to our goal of living and working with joy, and the connection that we also feel to what's above us and around us and beyond us here on Earth. And I think that comes back to our objective of trying to make a difference in how humans go out and be members. And so in a weird, strange way, I think that the starfish is representative of both of those and how they come together in a very human connection here. And I hope that we can, one way or another, kind of satisfy that human connection and those objectives that we have as we work in Starfish space.
I don't think I'll ever look at starfishes again the same after this summer. Could you remind me what a group of starfish is called?
A group of starfish is called a galaxy of starfish.
How fitting. Well, my summer here at Starfish Space has been really, truly lovely and excellent. And thank you so much, Austin, for doing this podcast. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as we promised, we've got an update here at the end. The rest of this podcast was recorded about a month ago, so it's been about a month since I've been at Starfish, but a lot of exciting things has happened. So, Austin, would you give us the update?
Yeah, we're back here just to share the next note or the next status update on the Otter Pup mission. We have on orbit right now as Starfish, we have the Otter Pup satellite, which is a small satellite designed to go try to dock with another satellite. And as we just discussed, when it was launched on orbit, it was left spinning at about 330 degrees per second. And over the course of a couple months, we worked to try to keep it alive. We worked to maintain the ability to talk with it. And we worked to try to slow down the rotation rate. And the exciting update from the Starfish side is in a way that maybe I didn't expect we'd ever quite get to, or definitely didn't expect that we would get to on this timeline. We've been able to stop the rotation of the Otter Pup satellite. And it's a tricky thing to try to do because satellites are not meant to rotate that fast. They're meant to rotate at a couple degrees per second. And we had, thankfully, put on board what are called torque rods, which are effectively electromagnets that you can use to push off of Earth's magnetic field. And it was a lot of work at our rotation rates to really refine what is the exact timing and manner in which to fire these electromagnets to be able to de-spin the satellite. But we've been able to do it. And we've released that publicly here. We still have a lot of steps to go to recover the Otter Pup mission to where it is. We have to go do a series of health checkouts and see is the satellite really in a position to be able to continue with the mission here, or was anything damaged in the process? We have to find somebody new to be able to operate around our satellite around, which is not a commonly done thing and is always a big challenge for us. But we're not spinning anymore, so we get a chance to go try to take those next couple of steps. And that's really exciting, and it's also really exciting to just be able to sit and point to something that we've done as a company now and say, look, Starfish Space has done something really hard in space and has a really impressive accomplishment with a satellite on orbit. It's not necessarily the thing we set out to go do with this mission, and it's not necessarily what we want to do as our business case as we extend the lives of satellites and dispose of space debris going forward. But it's still a great testament to kind of the team and the processes that we've done something really difficult in space, and that's really exciting.
That's amazing. I'm so happy for the team. One follow-up, but has any other companies ever done anything like this?
A few people have spun or despun satellites for various reasons. Another mission that is similar is NASA's Capstone mission, which I think the company in Colorado is Advanced Solutions, working with, I can't remember the satellite manufacturer they're working with, so I won't speculate here. But they were presenting a paper at a conference we were at a couple weeks ago where their satellite made it up to 130 degrees per second. And they used a thruster to de-spin the satellite. So they had a similar challenge that they had to tackle, and was similarly difficult for them. And then the other thing that I've reflected on as similar is excuse me, sneeze leaking in. But another thing that I reflected on that's similar is one of the Gemini missions. Neil Armstrong was an astronaut on the Gemini mission, and when they were first trying to dock a Gemini capsule, they ended up rotating at, I think, over 300 degrees per second, so very similar to our rotation rate, and almost lost control, and it's been dramatized in some movies, and were able to go and recover it. Both of those were done with thrusters, not with torque rods, but there's a few other cases out there of something similar, and a lot of times when that happens, it almost always ends up being a pretty epic story of recovery.
What I'm getting is that it was really hard, but you guys still managed to do it.
We did. We still got more steps to go to get what we want out of this mission, but exciting to be where we're at.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for the update, Austin.
Thanks for bringing me back to do it, Emma.